Welcome to my channel. Spice and Fiction presents Danmachi, Child of Night, Volume 1 Part 4, an original fanfiction series written by Spice and Fiction and narrated by AI. This story is a dark, alternate journey following Bell Cranel as he awakens a mysterious power that will put him at the center of calamity. Thank you for joining this adventure. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's start the story. Chapter 9. The Power of the Night Against the Power of the Souls. The rising sun cast a pale glow over the newly fortified entrance of the dungeon. The once bustling plaza was now more structured and disciplined. War tents lined the perimeter, magical wards shimmered faintly around the entrance, and armed adventurers stood in organized patrol formations. Orio had changed. This was no longer a casual place for adventurers to begin their daily dives. This was a war zone. The guild had made its decision. After the battle against the Chimera Commando and the recovery of Bell's strike team, the council finally approved what many merchants, familiars, and citizens were begging for: a soft reopening of the dungeon. It was not a decision made out of comfort, but necessity. With Orario's economy bleeding, they had little choice. Dungeon resources meant survival. Strict protocols were established. Every adventurer allowed entry would undergo magical screening to detect any philosopher's stones, alchemical signatures, or foreign enchantments. Escort procedures were drafted. No one entered the dungeon alone, and every squad needed guild-sanctioned approval. Expedition sizes were limited, with specific reporting checkpoints established at floors 1, 5, 10, and 15. Communication lines were set through magic relay stones to ensure swift response should another attack occur. The selected familiars were some of the strongest and most trusted in Orio. Loki Familia formed the backbone of the first expeditions, alongside a contingent of Ganesha Familia under Shakti Verma, Freya's representatives under Haydeen Celandand Alan Fromel, and several smaller familiars vetted for loyalty and skill. Bell Cranel stood among the first group, his cloak fastened at his shoulder, the faint shimmer of the Erebus veil dancing along its edge like night flowing through cloth. Beside him were A's Wallenstein, Alan, Rollo, and several hunter adventurers, those who had survived the encounter with the Chimera Commando. All right, Loki's voice rang out, half casual, half commanding. Everyone knows the rules. No heroics, no wandering off, and if you smell anything weird alchemical or otherwise, shout. We're not losing anyone to surprise bombs again. Bell's jaw tightened at the memory of the explosions that had rocked Orario's streets just weeks earlier. Ace caught his glance briefly, nodding once, silently telling him she was ready. The guild officers stepped forward and raised their hands. A faint blue shimmer washed over the crowd as the magical screening began. The spells searched for alchemical signatures and foreign enchantments. One by one, adventurers passed. A few were pulled aside for extra checks, but none were flagged with stones. Bell, as expected, passed cleanly. The philosopher's stone he had swiped weeks ago remained hidden and silent under his control. Once cleared, the strike team descended through Babel Tower into the dungeon. The first floors were eerily familiar. The soft earth, the dim moss-lit walls, the light rustling of low-level monsters, all of it felt almost normal again. Adventurers fanned out across the floor under watchful guild supervision. Ganesha Familia maintained perimeter control. Loki Familia spearheaded the advance, with Freya's hunters serving as mobile reinforcements. Bell's strike team was tasked with short patrol sweeps, maintaining security on floors 1 through 18. His sharpened senses, amplified by Nyx's fauna, picked up faint traces of alchemical interference here and there. But nothing like the Chimera lab from floor 14. The enemy wasn't gone, they were simply quiet. Still, for the merchants waiting above ground, this was enough. By midday, the guild issued the official announcement. The dungeon is partially reopened to select familiars. Commerce will resume under tight supervision. Adventurers are to follow guild protocols at all times. That single statement rippled through Orio like a spark through dry kindling. Merchants opened their stalls again, blacksmiths stoked their forges, alchemists and potion makers gathered ingredients, and traders flooded the market with cautious optimism. It wasn't full recovery, but it was a heartbeat returning to a wounded city. Loki sat at a makeshift officer's table near the front of the dungeon entrance, a bottle of wine already in her hand. She chuckled as she watched Bell's team preparing for their next sweep. Would you look at that? Bunny Boy's little night stroll saved the city's wallet. The following days blurred into tense routine. Bell and his team swept floor after floor, mapping out areas that could serve as infiltration points for Amestris operatives. They secured relay stones, shattered false passages, and flushed out small pockets of rogue adventurers, likely spies who had gone to ground after the main battles. On the morning of the third day of patrols, the strike team pushed deeper than planned. Floor 18. The place that once stood as a haven of peace, a safe zone. They expected a moment of calm. What they found instead was chaos. The village of Floor 18 had been overrun. The once serene groves and warm lights of the rest area were engulfed in a grotesque occupation. Dozens of chimera creatures roamed freely, their twisted forms fusing dungeon monsters with alchemical mutations. Towering iron-plated soldiers, hollow suits of armor infused with trapped souls stood like sentinels. Red alchemical circles pulsed along the ground, feeding into an enormous forward base that dwarfed the lab on floor 14. The flag of a mistress fluttered faintly in the damp dungeon air. Bell's breath caught. They've built a base down here. Rollo clenched his daggers. A big one. Alan scanned the perimeter, jaw tightening. There are too many of them for a direct fight. A's eyes narrowed. Then we don't fight. We look. They moved like ghosts, hugging the shadows and weaving between ruins. Bell's eyes flickered faintly with Nyx's power, allowing him to see the pulse of the stones embedded in the alchemical structures. What he saw chilled him: relay networks, energy channels, and containment circles far more advanced than what they encountered earlier. Rollo silently took down a stray alchemist scout, dragging the body into the dark. They pressed forward, gathering every scrap of intelligence they could, sketching the layout, counting the forces, tracking supply routes. One wrong step would have spelled death. By the time they pulled back, Bell's cloak was damp with sweat, and his breath came in controlled exhales. A chimera patrol had passed within inches of them at least twice. Alan covered their retreat, his spear poised, and A severed a last set of relay wires to delay pursuit. The team emerged back on floor 1 several hours later, exhausted, battered, but alive. At the forward base tent, Findame and Hayden stood over a large tactical map when Bell's team returned. The hunters stumbled in, their cloaks marked with dirt and monster blood. Rollo didn't bother with preamble. He slammed a rolled-up parchment onto the table. Floor 18. Amestris has an army down there. Alan leaned against a supply crate, breathing heavily. Chimeras, iron soldiers, alchemists, and a fully built base. Ace simply nodded once, eyes cold. They've claimed it. Finn unrolled the parchment with practiced calm, but his hands stilled when he saw the detailed sketches of the enemy's fortifications. This isn't a foothold. This is an invasion point. Hayden's normally sharp expression faltered for a moment. They were building under our noses this whole time. Seer, who had been waiting outside the tent, saw Bell's weary figure and rushed to him, helping him sit down. His shoulders sagged as the weight of what they'd seen finally settled in. Loki entered with her usual swagger, but when she caught sight of the sketches, her smile faded. The soft opening had stabilized Aurario's economy, but it had also revealed the truth. Amestris wasn't retreating. They were entrenched. Bell clenched his fists. He could still feel the shadows of that forward base in his mind, the heat of chimera breath, the weight of those iron soldiers' steps, the pulsing red glow of the philosopher's stones. The war wasn't just coming anymore. It was already here. The tent fell into a grim silence, broken only by the scratching of Finn's quill as he began marking new strategies on the map. Rollo leaned back, rubbing his bandaged arm. Ace sat quietly, lost in thought. Bell inhaled slowly, steadying his heartbeat. The soft opening had given Aurario breathing room, but it had also given them their next target. Amestris had chosen the battlefield, and so would Aurario. The massive marble doors of the Guild Council meeting hall loomed over Bell Cranel and Rollo as they approached. Bell rubbed his tired eyes, still sore from the previous day's operation. His cloak hung loosely over his shoulders, boots scuffed, and bandages peeked out from beneath his collar. Rollo wasn't in much better shape. His left arm was still wrapped in gauze, and his face showed the same grim weariness. Inside, the air was already tense. The circular council chamber was packed. Deities sat at the long, curved tables alongside their top familia captains. Mayak and Ganesha sat near the front, flanked by Shakti Varma and Hephaestus. Loki lounged casually in her chair with her trademark grin, though her eyes were sharp and calculating. Beside her sat Ace Wallenstein, Findame, and Gareth Landrock. Across the table, Hayden Selland and Alan Fromel represented Freya Familia, and even Otter was present, a clear sign that what they were about to discuss was no small matter. At the far end of the room, high above them on a dais, sat Auranus, cloaked in shadow and silence, listening. The moment Bell and Rollo entered, all eyes turned toward them. The hum of whispered discussion died instantly. Bell felt the weight of dozens of gazes, not just of gods and captains, but of expectations, pressure, and the burden of what he had seen below. Ah, Bunny Boy finally made it. Loki drawled, twirling a strand of her crimson hair. Took you long enough. Did Seer keep you warm all night? Bell flushed a little, but didn't answer. His mind was too heavy for banter. Rollo gave a curt nod to Finn and Hayden, then stepped forward and placed the rolled parchment containing their reconnaissance sketches onto the central table. Finn unrolled it with practiced precision, revealing detailed markings of Floor 18's landscape, now warped by a Amestris occupation. The outlines of Chimera patrol routes, Iron Soldier fortifications, and Alchemist command posts covered the map in black ink. A low murmur rippled through the chamber. "They've been digging in," Gareth muttered, leaning forward. "Bloody bastards made themselves a fortress down there." Hayden's gaze was as cold as steel. Amestris didn't build this overnight. Their logistics and relay stone network run deeper than we thought. They've been laying this groundwork for weeks, maybe longer. Mayak raised a hand, his usually calm voice laced with concern. "Do we have confirmation of their numbers?" Rollo straightened. "We counted at least 24 Chimera units, 30 iron-plated soldiers, and a rotating group of alchemists, probably 60 or more operatives at the forward base. That doesn't include whoever's commanding them or what they're building at the heart of their camp." Ganesha's booming voice filled the room. "That's a small army." Loki leaned forward, her grin fading into something sharp. "They're not hiding anymore. They're waiting for us to come down." Bell stepped up beside Rollo, his voice steady but low. "They're organized. The Chimeras and Iron Soldiers moved like units, not monsters. And they weren't just defending. They were preparing." His hands tightened into fists. "I saw relay lines embedded into the dungeon walls. They're spreading." The silence after his words was heavy. Even the deities frowned, realizing the implication. Amestris wasn't just occupying Floor 18. They were turning it into a staging ground. Finn placed both hands on the table, voice firm. "Then we need to strike back. We can't allow them to entrench any further. If we hesitate, Floor 18 will become a fortress we can't dislodge. And from there, they'll move upward." Hayden nodded in agreement. "If Amestris controls the safe floor, they control the gateway between the upper and middle levels. They can cut us off, manipulate the dungeon's flow, and force Oreo into a siege from beneath. We can't let that happen." Shakti rose from her seat, arms crossed. "Then what's the plan? A joint expedition? A mass assault?" Finn's eyes sharpened. "Not just an expedition. An army." The chamber buzzed with murmurs. Even the gods leaned forward. Gareth slammed a fist into his palm. "About time. We've been picking at them like rats in the dark. Let's give them a proper fight." Hephaestus tapped the table lightly. "And how will we equip this army? My forges are already strained from the supply disruptions. If we march, we'll need shields, armor, warding stones, and healer stations." Hayden replied coolly. "We'll requisition existing armaments from the major familias. Ganesha Familia will provide the bulk manpower for containment. Loki Familia will lead the strike teams. Freya Familia will spearhead the assault on their inner perimeter." Ganesha raised a brow, but nodded. "Ganesha Familia will stand ready. My children won't back down from this." Otter, silent until now, rumbled lowly, "We will crush them." Loki shot him a sideways grin. "Heh, now that's the spirit, big guy." Mayak interjected softly. "And the civilians? If this escalates, Oreo may face reprisals. Amestris isn't fighting like monsters. They're fighting like people who know how to destabilize a nation." Finn inclined his head. "That's why this can't drag on. A fast, decisive strike. A joint force under guild oversight. We hit Floor 18, tear down their base, and push them out of the dungeon." Aurenas finally spoke, his deep voice echoing through the hall. "Then so be it. The dungeon is Aurario's lifeblood. If they take it from beneath, we lose everything. You have my sanction to mobilize the familias." The atmosphere shifted immediately. Plans started forming on the fly. Shakti began listing troop numbers from Ganesha Familia. Gareth muttered about rallying the combat units. Hephaestus scribbled down supply chain allocations. Hayden and Finn exchanged curt nods, commanders aligned in purpose. Bell stood quietly amid the noise, feeling the gravity of it all settle on his shoulders. They were no longer simply reacting. This was the beginning of a war campaign. Rollo nudged him lightly. "Looks like we started something big, kid." Bell gave a tired, humorless laugh. "Yeah, we did." At the far end of the room, Loki leaned back with her arms folded behind her head, a glint in her crimson eyes. "All right then, Bunny Boy," she murmured to herself. "Next time we head down there, we're not coming to play." And as the council turned from debate to strategy, Bell could only watch as the weight of the coming war against Amestris took shape an army of adventurers preparing to strike back from the depths of the dungeon itself. The air around the dungeon entrance was electric. Bell Cranel stood at the edge of the forward base, where the once simple adventurer staging area had transformed into a vast military encampment. Rows of banners belonging to different familias fluttered in the wind-bright reds, deep blues, burnished golds, each symbol carrying the weight of countless battles and legends. The dirt road leading to Babel Tower had become a steady march of boots, the rhythmic thud of soldiers preparing for war. This wasn't a routine expedition. This was a mobilization. Bell exhaled slowly, watching from beneath the shadow of his hood as the joint army gathered. The sky was still pale, early morning mist curling low across the ground, softening the clang of steel, the stomps of armored boots, the calls of captains giving final orders. At the heart of the force was Loki Familia. He spotted Ace Wallenstein standing tall and silent beside Findame. Tiona Hiriut was adjusting her gauntlets with a grin that barely hid her excitement, while Tioni Hiriut stood with arms crossed, radiating confidence. Gareth Landrock barked at a group of younger adventurers to tighten their formations, his booming voice cutting through the morning haze. Loki herself remained behind at the forward command tent, her grin sharp and unreadable, but every member of her familia stood in perfect formation, their polished weapons glinting under the morning light. Next were the warriors of Freya Familia. Hayden Selland and Alan Fromel stood at the front with their usual air of quiet intensity, flanked by the legendary Otter, towering above the crowd like a walking fortress. Behind them, the Gulliver brothers Hogni Ragnar, Grur Gulliver, Alfred Gulliver, and Dvalin Gulliver checked their equipment with grim focus. Several Freya Familia healers lined up their supply crates and potions, ready to patch up the wounded when the time came. Freya herself would not be descending, but her familia stood as the iron fist of the coming assault. To their right, the disciplined ranks of Ganesha Familia marched in tight, practiced lines. Shakti Varma stood at their head, her spear gleaming like a silver flame. She wasn't smiling, she never smiled in moments like this, but the fire in her eyes was enough to stir confidence in the ranks behind her. Half of her familia had been chosen for this operation, enough to act as both shock troops and perimeter control. Bell also spotted a contingent of Mayak Familia, their healers moving quietly, faces calm, hands ready with satchels of elixirs and healing drafts. It struck him how different they looked compared to the armed fighters around them. No armor, no heavy blades, but their role was just as vital. And then there were the independents. Dozens of vetted adventurers from trusted smaller familia scouts, fighters, mages, support specialists, each one handpicked for loyalty and strength. Many had fought against Amestris already during the city bombings or defended Aurario's streets when the plague doctor struck. This was Aurario's answer to Amestris. Bell swallowed, overwhelmed by the sight. Rows upon rows of adventurers stretched from the base camp to the very edge of Babel Tower. Their armor gleamed, their weapons hummed faintly with magical reinforcement, and their expressions were carved with determination. For the first time since this war began, he truly understood just how many were willing to fight for their home. They look amazing, don't they? Bell turned. Seer Flova stood beside him, wrapped in her usual simple dress and apron, but her expression was softer than usual. She looked out at the sea of adventurers with a quiet awe. Bell nodded slowly. Yeah, they do. An entire city standing together, she said softly. Not for glory, but to protect what we have. Bell stared ahead at Aze adjusting her sword belt, at Alan quietly testing the tip of his spear, at Finn giving his final tactical orders. Hayden stood like a shadow beside Otter. Shakti walked among her troops. Healers arranged their stations. This wasn't just a mission. It was a war, and he was going to be part of the spear that would strike first. Seer turned toward him, her gray eyes glimmering faintly in the light. Bell. He looked at her, startled by the seriousness in her voice. Be careful, she said. No teasing, no cryptic smiles. Just those two words. I'll be waiting for you to come back. So don't make me wait too long, okay? Bell blinked, then laughed softly, a tired, small laugh, but genuine. Yeah, I promise. She stepped closer, gently fixing the clasp of his cloak, her fingers brushing against his chest. Then go. Hero. Bell didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded and turned back to the gathered army. Near the front, Rollo was talking with a squad of hunter adventurers, reviewing scouting formations and infiltration procedures. He waved Bell over, and Bell joined him. His hands tightened around the hilt of his sword, the blade forged by one of Hephaestus's best smiths, now humming faintly with runes of reinforcement. The war horns echoed across the encampment, a low, resonant sound that silenced the crowd. Loki Familia. Formation 1. Freya Familia. Formation 2. Ganesha Familia. Hold your lines. The guild officers strode between the lines, shouting final checks. Magical detectors passed over adventurers, making sure no Amestris infiltration had slipped in. Healers tightened their satchels. Scouts adjusted their cloaks. Bell looked over his shoulder one last time. Seer was still there at the edge of the forward base, her hands clasped together, watching him. Then he faced forward. The weight of his cloak settled on his shoulders like the weight of the night itself. He inhaled deeply, the cold morning air filling his lungs. This was the army that would march to floor 18. This was the hammer that would fall on Amestris. And Bell Cranel would be at the heart of it. The sound of hundreds of boots striking the earth filled the air as the army of Oreo began to march toward the dungeon entrance, a living river of steel, flame, shadow, and hope. Floor 5 greeted them with the familiar breath of damp stone and moss-lit walls and then swallowed the joint army in violence. The first warning was a hiss underfoot. A line of fire erupted along the corridor, seemed like a fuse, splitting forward ranks apart. The second was a roar behind, as a slab of the ceiling sloughed into a man-made mudslide, sweeping a dozen adventurers from their feet and slamming them into a bend in the passage. Shouts fractured into every direction at once. Shields up. Staggered files. Finn's voice cracked across the din, precise as a blade. He raised one hand and three-finger signal for wedge. Loki Familia veterans snapped into motion around him, their shields overlapping, spears bristling through the gaps. Left flank holds. Right flank advances 2 paces and pins. His whistle cut once short, sharp. The line shifted like a living wall. A thunderclap answered him. Fire bullets tight, fist-sized spheres of alchemical flame rattled down the corridor from somewhere unseen, exploding against shields, skipping across stone to detonate underfoot. Healers dragged the nearest wounded behind a pillar as the front ranks braced. Hadine's voice overlapped Finn's, cool and clipped. Counter heat wards on the forward wedge. Smokescreen now. Freya Familia casters thrust sigilled plates into the ground. A pale film shimmered over the leading shields as a curtain of gray mist hissed outward, choking the corridor of sight lines. Alan carved the left wall vent them. Alan Fromel drove his spear into a hairline crack. Stone tore with a scream. A spillway opening for the smoke to funnel through and blind the enemy angles. From the fog came metal too fast. The first of the slim iron-plated soldiers shot out of a side fissure like a thrown spear, its body narrow and jointed, plates tapered for silent movement. It landed in the middle of a squad with almost no sound, then exploded into motion, elbows like knives, fingers like chisels. One blow caved a helm. Another tripped a mage and drove a blade toward their throat. Tioni's kick caved its chest plate in, sending the hollow suit skidding. It rose without breath, a puppet of will alone, and scissored toward her again. Tiona met it with a laugh and a hammering double fist that cracked its head back into the wall. Fast ones in the smoke. Gareth bellowed from the second rank. Keep your backs to stone. Bell stood 3 files back, caught in the press of bodies, the world collapsing into flashes, fire lines zigzagging the floor, mud sucking at boots, earth spikes punching up through moss. A slid past him, sword drawn, hair flicked by heat as she cut 2 fire bullets from the air and shouldered into the wedge without a word. Someone tugged Bell's cloak, shoving him to cover as an avalanche of loosened rubble thundered down the far bend, sealing a side corridor and splitting the force. Cut them into pockets. Hadine said no panic, only math. Shukti, hold the brake. Otter, straight through the center line. Otter moved like inevitability, shouldering into the mist with a sound like grinding mountains. Hunters, find the casting positions. They're not using Falna. Look for alchemical tripod marks and residual chalk. Another blast underfoot fire landmines stitched beneath the moss. A line of Ganesha Familia shields went to their knees, the blast wave ripping men and women from their footing. Shukti Varma slammed her spear but into the stone. Titan, her voice steadied a buckling flank. Anchor on me. Bell blinked smoke from his eyes. He couldn't see the enemy, only flame and flashes of moving iron. He drew, then hesitated. The corridor churned with their own people, his breath caught in the crush of orders. Where do I go? What do I hit? He stepped, stopped, stepped again. A scream to the right dragged his head around mud, swallowed a mage to the waist. 2 slim soldiers fell upon him like wolves. Rollo ghosted out of the fog, one dagger in a seam at an iron elbow, another at the throat gap, twisting. On your feet, he hissed. hauling the mage free with his good arm. Bell eyes. High, not forward. Track the shots, not the shooters. Bell forced his gaze up. Fire bullets came in arcs 3 angles, repeating cadence. Earth spikes sprouted in patterned bursts, not random. He heard Finn's whistle again, 2 short notes, 1 long. The wedge rippled, bent, reformed as a V pointed toward the hottest fire lane. The cavern opened wider, then constricted. The army's columns stretched through a bottleneck. From the haze, the other kind of iron-plated soldier came large. Slammer class. Its silhouette filled the passage, plates layered thick like a kiln's walls, each step thudding with deliberate weight. Fire crawled along the seams, venting at the joints. It lowered a plated shoulder and simply walked into the front shields. The crash was like a battering ram. The first rank skidded backwards 2 full strides, shields screaming against stone. The slammer soldier didn't stop. It waded forward, arms sweeping, crushing, its helm a blank furnace face. Pin it. Hooks. Finn's order cut through. 2 teams surged. Grapnels bit into seams at the shoulders and hips. Brace. The line dug in. A's left hip. A's vanished in the smoke and reappeared as a flash on the slammer's flank. Her blade found the thin strip of articulation at the hip seam and bit deep. Sparks showered. The big suit lurched, pivoted toward her, arm coming down like a falling gate. Otter hit it from the other side. The corridor shook. Metal crumpled. Further back, Haydine's hand snapped once, twice. Ward plates to second line. Rotate wounded. Keep the channel clear. Casters. Earth counter shallow shelf. 3 spans ahead. 3 Freya mages slammed palms to stone. The floor's slick mud gained a lip that turned the next enemy-made slide into a low wave that broke harmlessly at their boots. A hiss ran the length of the column sigils, igniting. Fire from the ceiling this time, poured like oil and lit by a spark. Hephaestus artisans' cloaks smoked, but held. Those without proper gear screamed. Douse. Shakti's command. Mayaka's healers moved with disciplined speed, flinging vials that burst in white steam and cool rain. Triage line on the right. Don't chase, hold the lane. A slim iron soldier leapt from a shadow seen straight at Bell. Instinct took over. He brought his sword up just in time. The iron forearm slammed his guard aside, and the second hand chopped for his neck. Bell ducked, felt heat graze his scalp, and kicked hard. The soldier staggered. Rollo's thrown dagger pinned its wrist to the wall. Bell drove his blade into the collar gap. It shuddered once and went limp, hanging from the knife like a broken marionette. Breathe, Rollo said, already gone. Explosions stitched the rear. Earth spikes ripped up in a grid, fencing a squad away from the main body. Ganesha's shields interposed too late for 2, just in time for 5. Gareth bulldozed through, dragging a younger adventurer by the scruff and hurling him back toward the healers. Keep your feet, boy. Stone won't kill you if you don't let it. Left balcony, a scout cried. Figures flickered alchemists at tripods, hands clapping, palms to stone. Fire bullets multiplied. Counter battery, Haydeen said. Alan's spear became a lightning line. It punched through smoke and took a tripod off its mounts. 2 Freya archers exhaled in tandem. Their arrows shattered chalk arrays, and the barrage thinned. Finn shifted the formation again, wedge into staggered echelons. Lanes for casters to fire through, lanes for runners to shuttle wounded back. Front, hold. Second, break the fast ones. Third, eyes up, deny the angles. His comm forced the chaos to obey. Gareth, rotate. Tiona plug the gaps. Ace with me. Bell's legs trembled not from fear so much as the drag of indecision. Every time he lunged toward a crisis, it sealed or shifted before he arrived. The battlefield moved like water. He felt like he was drowning in it. A clipped cry to his left, he pivoted too late. A slim soldier raked a woman across the back and vanished into the smoke. Bell chased 2 steps and stopped, lost it in gray. Cranel. Shakti's voice snapped him back. Guard the corridor mouth. Nothing through to the healers. She shoved a wounded lancer into his arms and sprinted past to rejoin her line. He planted himself at the choke where the passage narrowed to the triage lane. 2 more slim suits tried to slip through. Bell met them point first, teeth bared, boots braced. Steel rang. The first went down with its wrist severed. The second fainted high and cut low. Bell's shin sang pain, but he held the line. The slammer soldier ahead finally toppled, a ruined heap. A fresh barrage of earth spikes stabbed up behind the front to split them again. Haydeen was already there, palm to stone, voice flat, sheer. The spike's tips snapped like chalk under an invisible pressure. Advance 2. Finn echoed, and the wedge crawled forward, foot by bloody foot. For minutes that felt like hours, the ambush ground itself against discipline. The enemy never showed a face, only the hiss of tripods, the clap of hands, the cruel geometry of trap work. Aurario's joint army refused to break. Ganesha's shields became bedrock. Loki's veterans were the knife edge that kept finding purchase. Freya's precision erased firing points one by one. Mayaka's people stitched flesh and poured cool water where heat had tried to claim it. The Independents fought like they had something to prove and somewhere to go back to. At last, the fire lanes thinned. The avalanches ceased. Smoke lifted in ragged curls and revealed wreckage-blackened stone, shattered iron husks, the wounded groaning in the tree-off channel. The enemy had slipped away, leaving only the aftertaste of ash and chalk and the knowledge that they had tested the army and drawn blood. Finn lowered his hand. "Count," he said, not unkindly. Runners moved. Numbers came back like weights. Hayden exhaled through his nose, eyes already on the next bend. "They'll try again 2 floors down," he said to no one in particular. "Adjust spacing. Expect cross corridors and nested tripods." Bell wiped soot from his face with a shaking hand. The urge to do something, anything, still clawed at him, but the battle had not wanted a hero. It had demanded a hinge that held. He looked down at his blade, then back at the living wall of shields and spears rebuilding itself around him, and took his place inside it. The army reformed, scarred, breathing hard, unbroken, and stepped forward into floor 6. The forward base on floor 5 held steady under a ring of shields while officers argued in low, crisp tones. When the runners finished their casualty counts, Finn raised a hand, and the murmurs stopped. He looked to Hayden, then to Shakti, and finally to Bell. "Scout detachment," Finn said. "We need eyes and a blade ahead of the column." Hayden's nod was minute, voice flat. "Speed and silence. Cut the tripods, break the chalk, tear down any relay stones you find. No heroics, no noise unless you have to." Shakti planted her spear and swept her gaze across the volunteers. "Remember what we face. The iron-plated soldiers are hollow armor inhabited by souls, not flesh. They don't eat, don't sleep, don't tire. You can't frighten them. You break them, or they keep coming." Finn's finger stabbed a rough sketch in the dust. "Bell, A's, Allen, Otter, Rollo plus 6 hunters. You'll move ahead to floors 6 through 8, clear ambushers, dismantle traps, and mark safe lanes. The army holds until you signal green." He met Bell's eyes. "Destroy anything Amestris left behind." Orders rippled, brief and final. Cloaks were cinched. Bandages tightened. Bell checked the strap on his scabbard and forced a slow breath through the ache in his ribs. A stood beside him, calm as stone, blade at her hip. Allen rolled his shoulder once, the spear spinning in his hand with casual precision. Rollo disappeared for a heartbeat behind a stack of crates and reappeared lighter. Half his daggers already palmed, the rest hidden where only he knew. Otter simply stepped forward, a mountain in motion. They dropped into floor 6 like a shadow. No alchemists, no iron suits. Only the dungeon's native voice, soft growls in the dark, the wet scuff of claws. A lizardman pack flowed around a column. Otter crushed the lead with one hand, and the rest fled without a sound. A's wind hissed once. The tail stragglers fell cleanly. Rollo knelt in a split seam and scraped chalk from the stone-old alchemical marks, stale and thin. He brushed them away until nothing remained. Bell let Nyx's power open the dark. The moss glow thinned, the veins in the rock brightened. He listened and felt. No whispers, no crimson hum. "Clear," he said. They moved to floor 7. A nest of imps swarmed. Allen's spear sketched lines of refusal that turned the rush into a heap. 2 hunters strung a wire, tripped and pinned a hard-shelled crawler, and ended it without fanfare. Rollo found a relay cap hidden under a growthen, empty socket where a philosopher's stone had sat. He snapped them out, tucked the broken ring into his pouch, and drew a cross circle on the wall for the column behind. "Still no Amestris," Bell murmured. "Means they're waiting," Allen said. "Or they think we won't reach them." Otter said nothing. The stair to floor 8 spat them into a long, ribbed hall. The architecture shifted, arches thickened, the floor's grain ran in unnatural grooves, and the air turned hot and metallic. Bell's sight flared. Crimson lines pulsed beneath the stone like an infection. He raised a hand. "Stop." Rollo ghosted forward and flattened to a column. "Tripods," he mouthed, pointing to 3 balcony mouths carved high in the walls. In each recess, a steel frame waited silent, ready, chalk rings still wet beneath them. Farther ahead, clustered at intersections, sack groups, chimera squads crouched like coiled traps, and iron soldiers standing statue still, their helms aimed down the corridor. Two types of suits, slim and slammer, interspersed, and alchemists in coats marked with the serpent star emblem knelt with palms poised above chalk. Positions, Ace whispered. Her eyes darted, counting lanes. 2 fire lanes, 1 earth. Elite pattern, Alan said. They'll stagger, shock, and burn, then close with fast units. Rollo tapped Bell's elbow. You cut their heart. I'll cut their hands. Otter stepped to the center line and rolled his neck. Advance. They struck first. Rollo vanished straight up the rib of the wall, toe and fingertip to the smallest holds. His first dagger cut the throat of the leftmost tripod operator before breath could become sound. The body slumped, and Rollo kicked the frame loose. It clanged, rattled, and toppled over the balcony, killing the chalk circle on impact. His second throw pierced the palm of the middle alchemist, pinning hand to stone. The alchemist screamed, and the circle fizzled. The third tripod started to spit flame. A's blade sang. The flame stuttered, and the tripod split neatly in half. The corridor exploded anyway. Earth bucked in a grid, spikes knifed up in staggered rows. Fire bullets, tighter and hotter, hammered the floor in a pattern that bracketed Otter's stride. A slammer suit stepped through the barrage like a furnace on legs, shouldering into the center. Slim units sprang from the flanks, blades and palms aimed for joints and throats. Otter met the slammer with his bare hands. He pivoted, sank, and lifted armor screamed as rivets tore. He turned his hips and threw. The slammer soldier hit the ceiling and cratered the stone. When it fell, Alan's spear pinned it to the ground through the collar seam, and Ace took the helm off in a single motion. Steam vented like a dying kiln. Bell moved with the hunters to the right lane. Erebus Vale woke like a living knight and clasped his shoulders. Black starlight crawled his sleeves. A slim unit scissored at his head. He ducked under, slid, and cut up. Black lightning traced his blade. The cut went through seam and soul. The suit folded. 2 chimeras bounded, a wolf torso grafted to a mantis hindquarters, and a boar with plated jaw and 2 many eyes. The first leaped. Bell's shadow sword caught its throat, and the head tumbled, snapping mandibles still clicking air. The boar hit his shoulder with a hammer's force. The veil hugged the strike and bled the momentum into the floor. Bell rolled and rose in the same breath, blade a crescent. The boar fell in 3 pieces. Right lane, a hunter shouted. Alchemists. Rollo answered from nowhere. 3 knives, 3 wrists, 3 circles broken. On the left, Ace threaded through a braid of chimera tails and iron elbows. Her wind didn't roar, it breathed. Each breath accelerated a cut, and each cut opened a path. A slim unit tried to mirror her step. Learning, adapting, she shifted tempo and turned the feint into a final line across its helm. It fell neatly. Front, Alan called. 2 slammers advanced shoulder to shoulder, dragging an earth shelf ahead of them like a movable wall, chalk slick and flame-scarred. Their footfalls shook dust from the arches. Behind them, a cluster of alchemists clapped and pressed, trying to reform a firing ring. Break the wall, Hayden would have said. Alan did not wait to hear it. He planted, coiled, and launched. His spear struck the shelf not as a point but as a bar, transferring everything into the seam that held the slab together. Stone cracked like old bone. Ace streaked through the falling rock, slipped between the slammers, and cut both knee joints with 2 breaths and 1 step. Otter arrived before the suits could catch themselves. His fist went in at the seam beneath the gorget and came out the other side. The second slammer turned to face him too slow. Otter seized the rim of its helm and twisted. Metal shrieked. The suit collapsed. Bell's lane convulsed. The elite slim soldiers did not flee, they flowed. 2 flanked high, 3 low, 1 straight in, their movements coordinated by someone's silent count. 1 hunter screamed. Another took the gap with a shield, teeth bared. Bell's sword sang. The veil flared as he parried 3 strikes in a blur and answered with a single, ugly thrust that pinned a suit to the wall. Rollo popped from a column shadow with blood on his lips and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Tripod nest dead. He slid under a chimera lunge, lashed a cord around its rear legs, and snapped his wrist. The beast fell hard and Alan's spear finished it. Rear cluster, a hunter yelled. From behind the enemy line, a ring flared, fresh chalk, fresh hands. Fire bullets formed in a crown and began to drop. Bell didn't think. He looked. The ring's heart pulsed like a wound. He stepped forward as if through water. The veil drank heat and hissed. He threw not his blade, but his shadow. The veil lanced outward like a dart of night and smothered the ring. The bullets guttered into sparks that died on cold stone. Ace glanced once, said nothing, and moved past him to take the caster's hand at the wrist. Clean, quiet. The corridor settled into the sound of metal giving up its shape. The elites fought to the last plate, but the ambushers' rhythm had been broken. Without tripods and circles, their patterns collapsed into individual duels, and there, Orario's killers were better. Otter crushed, Ace carved, Alan pierced, Rollo erased hands and eyes and angles. The hunters caught, tripped, and finished, moving like wolves behind larger wolves. When the last slim unit tried to melt into a seam, Bell was already there. He pinned it with his forearm and drove the shadow sword through the gorget gap. The suit slumped, light inside it going out like a star smothered in ash. Silence came in layers. First the end of formal clapping from the alchemists, then the dying clatter of plates, then the ragged breathing of the living. The heat lifted. The crimson hum in the stone dimmed, but did not disappear. Alan wiped his spear on a shattered mantle and looked to Bell. Traps. They walked the lanes methodically, the whole detachment now a set of hands for a single intent. Rollo scraped chalk to powder and scattered it. Hunters cracked tripod legs and snapped the spring housings, then ground the mounts under heel. Ace traced the faintest red lines with the tip of her blade, a map of veins in the dungeon's stone, and cut every anchor point she found. Otter pulled a relay mount out of a wall with a sound like a cork from a cask, and the hum dipped another shade. Bell knelt by a hidden socket and felt the air cool as his shadow smothered its throat. The whisper he expected did not come. Whatever stone had been here was long gone, moved deeper, guarded better. Lane Green, Rollo said at last, low but certain. Bell stood and let the veil fade back against his skin. His breath steadied. Blood spotted the floor around his boots where it had found seams in his bandages, but his hands were still. Alan tipped his chin toward the stair down. We mark it and call the column. Ace nodded. Move. Otter said nothing, and nothing more was needed. The scout detachment left floor 8 behind. Not clean, not quiet, but open and headed for the next bend where the dungeon waited with its patient stone and Amestris with its patient malice. The scent of iron and burned chalk clung to the air as Bell Cranel stood at the edge of the dim cavern on floor 10, his blade dripping with black residue. The last of the Amestris ambushers, a pair of slim iron-plated soldiers, collapsed under a coordinated strike from Ace and Otter. Rollo vanished into the shadows and reappeared a heartbeat later, sliding a blood-wet dagger into its sheath. Area secure, Alan reported, scanning the corridor. Bell wiped the sweat from his brow and nodded. Good. Send a runner. One of the hunters, light-footed and carrying a signaling flare, saluted sharply before vanishing down the stairway they'd cleared earlier. That was the rhythm they'd perfected. Annihilate the ambush, signal the army, advance, then disappear again. Finn, Haydeen, and Shakti trusted Bell's strike team to rip open the enemy's traps so the main army could push deeper with minimal casualties. As the runner vanished, Bell turned to the others. Floor 13 next. Their march through floor 11 and 12 was uneventful. Dungeon monsters rose and fell quickly under A's and Otter's strikes, while Rollo scouted ahead like smoke slipping through cracks. The true resistance waited on floor 13. At the base of a ribbed corridor, tripods gleamed faintly, 3 firing nests set at staggered heights, a dozen chimeras chained in formation, and clusters of iron soldiers standing sentinel. The moment Bell's team breached the corridor, the trap was sprung. Fire bullets screamed down the lane, followed by earth spikes tearing through the stone floor. But this time, Bell and his team were ready. Ace, Otter front. Bell barked. Otter charged like a living siege weapon, his massive frame breaking through the first wave of spikes. Ace followed like a gust of invisible wind, sword dancing through incoming fire. Rollo vaulted up the walls, vanishing into the upper nests where the alchemists hid. Dagger strikes silenced their hands before the next volley could form. Alan met the slim iron suits head-on, his spear carving precise arcs. The chimeras lunged, but hunters flanked them from both sides. Bell slipped into Erebus veil shadows, wrapping his body like liquid starlight, and carved through a trio of suits in quick, brutal strokes. Within minutes, the ambushers were wiped out. Rollo dropped from a nest, landing beside Bell with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. They're getting smarter. Patterns are tighter. Doesn't matter, Bell said, steadying his breath. We're faster. Another hunter sprinted back to the army, carrying their green flare. Within an hour, the joint force would advance into a cleared floor 13. Floor 15 was worse. The alchemists had grown bolder, an entire choke point had been turned into a kill zone. Iron-plated soldiers flanked corridors in multiple layers, chimeras dug into defensive positions, and fire runes glowed faintly on the ground. This isn't an ambush, Alan muttered. This is a line. Bell met his gaze and tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword. Then we break it. Otter took the lead again, charging through the initial wall of fire like a battering ram. Ace flanked left, slicing through a line of slim suits before they could regroup. Rollo swept right, dismantling chalk circles with surgical precision. Hunters followed, picking off support alchemists with well-placed strikes. Bell moved through the center like a shadow, his sword a storm of black lightning. Every time an iron soldier lunged, he slipped through the gaps and shattered the stone-fueled cores with precision. The battle stretched longer than the previous floors. Elite units tried to box them in. Chimera packs coordinated their strikes. But one by one, the defenders fell under the relentless precision of Aurario's best. When the final Chimera collapsed with a guttural roar, silence blanketed the hallway. Rollo kicked a smoldering tripod over and whistled low. "They're bleeding resources here." Bell nodded and gave the signal. "Runner." The hunter bolted back toward the main army. Bell and the others stood in the wreckage of another Amestris ambush, breathing hard but alive. Hours later, after repeating their attack and signal routine 3 times, Bell's team reached the cavernous entrance to floor 17. The dungeon walls were scarred by old battles, red alchemical runes still burned faintly in the cracks. They hadn't encountered another ambush since floor 15, but no one was naive enough to think the way ahead was clear. Alan tapped the butt of his spear against the floor. "We've opened them a path." Rollo crouched on a rock, peering into the dark below. "Which means they're saving something nasty for us on floor 18. Bell exhaled slowly, the veil melting off his shoulders. "Then we'll be ready for it." Behind them, faint echoes of boots began to rise through the stairwells. The joint adventurer army was on its way down. The scouts had done their job, 3 ambushes annihilated, the path cleared to floor 17. But in the heavy silence of the dungeon's depths, Bell could still feel it. The enemy was waiting. The roar that thundered through floor 17 was unlike anything the joint adventurer army had ever heard. It wasn't just the bellow of a monster, it was a sound that vibrated the stone, that crawled into the bones of everyone present. The Goliath stood in the heart of the massive cavern, but this was no ordinary floor boss. Alchemical steel had been welded into its skin like jagged armor plates. Its chest glowed faintly with the unmistakable crimson pulse of philosopher's stones embedded deep within. Each pulse made the ground tremble as if the dungeon itself were breathing. This was not a natural enemy. This was a weapon. "Form ranks," barked Finn. His voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. His eyes sharpened not with surprise, but with calculation. This was no ambush. It was a test. Behind the front lines, Hayden Selland issued orders with calm precision, his voice resonating like a chime through magical amplifiers. "Casters on the ridge. Healers stay behind the wall. Spears and shields forward. Don't let that thing rush the back line." Shakti Verma raised her spear and pointed toward the monster, her deep voice booming. "We take it down here and now." Ganesha Familia lock it in place. A wave of armored adventurers surged forward, shields locking, forming a human wall around the Goliath's approach path. From the backlands, Loki Familia archers and casters began their assault, wind arrows, fire blasts, and earth spikes pelting the giant's legs and torso. The Goliath's reaction was immediate. It slammed its massive hand into the ground, sending a shockwave that shattered the first wave of spells like glass. Red alchemical sigils pulsed across its limbs, and flames burst out in rings around its feet. Several lower-level adventurers were thrown aside, their armor dented and their bodies smoking. Finn's voice boomed again. "Hold the line." At the front, Gareth Landrock gritted his teeth, slamming his axe into the ground to anchor himself as the shockwave tried to fling him back. "He's a big one, ain't gonna be easy." Beside him, Tioni and Tiona darted through the gaps, their movements precise and deadly. Tiona leapt high, aiming to slash at the creature's neck, but the alchemical plating deflected her blow with a clang that rattled her arm. Tioni, faster and lower, went for the knee joint where steel met flesh. Her spear pierced through, but not deep enough. The Goliath roared again. Its glowing chest pulsed brighter, and this time a surge of fire erupted from its chest like a cannon blast. Adventurers ducked behind shields and hastily erected magical barriers. Even through the defenses, the heat seared. Hayden reacted instantly, chanting in low, rhythmic tones. A barrier of starlit mist expanded across the middle ranks, dampening the blast's reach. "Counter fire now," he ordered. From the rear, mages unleashed a barrage of high-tier spells, concentrated wind, ice, and flame crashing into the creature's side. It staggered but didn't fall. Alchemical steel blackened but didn't break. The crimson glow pulsed again, and cracks in the cavern walls trembled like they were alive. Bell and the scout team sat several hundred meters away in a side cavern, resting after their string of brutal ambush fights. Even from here, they could feel the shockwaves of the battle. Rollo leaned against the wall, adjusting his daggers. That thing's no normal Goliath. Alan's grip tightened on his spear. It's been altered. Philosopher's stones embedded in the chest. That's amplifying everything. Ace said nothing, but her golden eyes fixed on the red light flickering against the cavern walls. Even at this distance, the pulses were visible. Bell clenched his fists. Every instinct told him this wasn't just a boss fight, it was bait. Back at the battlefield, the joint adventurer army adapted. Shakti charged through the front line with her spear spinning, her movement disciplined and relentless. She met one of the Goliath's slamming fists head-on, her spear glowing with divine-imbued light. She pierced through the air pressure and stabbed into its palm, forcing the monster to reel back with a guttural roar. Gareth bellowed from the left flank. While it's open, Tiona and Tioni seized the opportunity. Tiona flipped onto its arm, running up the steel plating like a streak of light, and slashed across the Goliath's face. Sparks flew. Tioni launched a perfectly aimed strike at the glowing seam between plates on its chest. The Philosopher's stones pulsed in anger, releasing a burst of fire that sent the Amazonas sisters crashing to the ground, their armor smoking. Barrier reinforcement. Hayden called out, sweat streaking down his temple as he poured mana into the magical shield. The mages behind him chanted in unison, struggling to keep the shimmering wall stable. Finn dashed in, moving faster than most could see. His spear stabbed precisely into the monster's inner thigh, where no steel protected it. The Goliath bellowed, stumbling for a moment. But almost immediately, the stones glowed again, healing the wound as molten metal sealed it shut. This thing's designed to wear us down, Finn muttered under his breath. And he was right. Every attack the adventurers launched was met with alchemical regeneration. Every spell drained their mana further. The Goliath wasn't fighting to win quickly, it was forcing them to burn resources. A strategist's trap. Otter entered the fray last, his cloak fluttering in the heat. The Goliath swung a massive arm at him like a hammer, but Otter caught it on his forearm and shoved back, the ground splintering beneath him. With a snarl, he slammed his fist into the Goliath's stomach, denting the alchemical plating for the first time. Now, Finn shouted. Dozens of adventurers unleashed a coordinated strike, spears, swords, spells, arrows crashing into the damaged section. The creature howled, staggering backward toward the wall. The light of the Philosopher's stones flickered wildly, destabilizing the alchemical reaction in its chest. Hayden clenched his fist and ordered, push everything. If we let it recover, we're done. Shakti and Ganesha Familia surged forward like a living wall. Loki Familia fighters followed, relentless and precise. The joint force roared as one. Otter delivered the final blow, a crushing punch straight into the Goliath's plated chest. The Philosopher's stones cracked, crimson energy spilling like liquid fire. A blinding explosion filled the cavern, sending tremors all the way to Bell and the scouts' rest area. When the light faded, the Goliath lay broken, its chest cavity shattered, the alchemical plates blackened and split. Adventurers panted, many slumped on the ground. Potion bottles littered the battlefield. Half the healers were already tending to the wounded. From the shadows, several unseen Amestris agents watched. Their leader smirked coldly. Their army is strong, he murmured. Good. That means they'll be tired when they reach us. Floor 17 had fallen. But the real war waited below. The descent to floor 18 began in silence. Only the echoing of boots against stone filling the stairwell. No one needed to speak. The entire joint adventurer Arma Loki Familia, Ganesha Familia, Freya Familia's elite units, Mayak healers, and other trusted adventurers understood the weight of what awaited below. Bell Cranel marched at the front of the second formation beside Ace, Alan, Rollo, Shakti, Finn, Hayden, and Otter. The air grew heavier the moment they crossed the final step. A pulse cold, suffocating rippled through every adventurer like an invisible wave. It was subtle at first, then sharp. Fauna. It's weakening, a hunter gasped. Bell felt it too. The fauna draining sigil, an alchemical formation spanning the cavern's ceiling and floor, was leeching divine blessings from everyone in the army. Muscles grew heavy, movement sluggish, magical circulation dimmed as if chains had been placed around their souls. Shakti hissed under her breath. They've prepared the entire floor. Ahead, the Amestris fortress loomed like a steel heart buried in the dungeon's flesh. Dozens of alchemical turrets lined its walls, thick black cannons engraved with crimson sigils. Behind those walls, Bell could see the glimmer of philosopher's stones pulsing in unison. The enemy was ready. Finn raised his hand. Form ranks. Shields in front, casters behind. Maintain distance. Slow advance. The adventurer army moved with trained precision. Shield bearers locked into the front line, spear wielders and swordsmen covered the flanks, and mages began low-level buffs despite their diminished fauna. Hayden stood near the center, a magical relay device strapped to his belt, trying to counterbalance the draining effect, but the sigil was too large. Even he winced from the pressure. Then, with a sound like the crack of the world splitting, the fortress opened fire. The first wave of alchemical artillery shells rained down in a barrage of fire, lightning, ice, and shockwave explosions. The front line was nearly obliterated in an instant. Fire shells incinerated 2 entire squads before they could raise their barriers. Lightning cracked through shield lines, jumping between adventurers like a living storm. Ice shells detonated on impact, turning parts of the floor into jagged killing fields, impaling the unlucky. "Hold formation," Finn roared, his voice barely piercing through the thunder. "Keep moving forward." Hayden slammed his staff into the ground, weaving layered barriers over the center column. "Healers to the rear. Spread out or you'll all die in one blast." The bombardment intensified. For every 20 meters they advanced, 10 more adventurers fell, burning, frozen, or shredded by shockwave shrapnel. Blood stained the dungeon's stone crimson. Then the rear guard screamed. From behind the joint adventurer army, 24 chimera commandos emerged from hidden alcoves and shadows. These weren't the usual mindless beasts. They moved in perfect formation, covered in alchemical plating and bearing philosopher's stone cores pulsing with energy. Wings, claws, fangs, and magic merged into terrifying war beasts designed to trap and slaughter. "Rear, rear," Rollo shouted, spinning his blades to intercept one that lunged for a healer line. The joint adventurer army was pinned. Fortress cannons at the front, chimera commandos behind, and in the middle a bleeding, fauna-drained force struggling to hold itself together. Finn's sharp blue eyes darted back and forth. "We can't retreat, Devi, you cut it off. We push through or die here." Hayden gritted his teeth, trying to counter the sigil, but the overwhelming flow made his magic flicker and falter. "I can't nullify it. It's draining too fast." Shakti roared as she skewered a chimera through the chest. "Then we fight our way through." The next volley came, a coordinated bombardment from the fortress. This time, the shells weren't scattered. They were aimed directly at the adventurer army's center, aimed to wipe out their leadership. Bell's instincts screamed at him. In that moment of overwhelming dread, when flames reflected in his crimson eyes, he reached deep into the core of his soul. The night answered. The world around him blurred into darkness as oniric bloom bloomed within him, an ancient manifestation magic that turned the stuff of dreams into solid reality. A circle of lunar mist erupted around him like a tidal wave, swirling upward into a colossal barrier of soft white and black light. It stretched over the central army, thickening as the first shell struck. Boom! The impact shook the entire floor. But the shells didn't break through. The mist held. Another volley came. Fire burned across the barrier. Lightning carved cracks of light into it. Ice shattered against its surface like brittle glass. But the barrier did not collapse. Bell stood in the center of it all, his boots buried slightly in the stone, his entire body trembling under the strain of holding the barrier. Oniric bloom wasn't infinite, it was forged from his soul, from the raw power of his will. "Bell!" Ace shouted, turning toward him. He gritted his teeth. "I'll hold the shells. Focus on the others." The battle outside the barrier became a blood-soaked storm. With the fortress unable to bombard the center directly, the chimera commandos and elite iron-plated soldiers charged from both flanks. Their movements were merciless. Ace, Tiona, and Alan led the right flank, swords and spears flashing through chimera flesh. Rollo and a dozen hunters darted through the left flank, taking down alchemists and disabling portable cannons. Otter fought in the center rear, taking the brunt of the chimera pack alone, punching through armored beasts like they were sacks of meat. The adventurers fought savagely, but the fauna-draining sigil continued its assault. Every strike became slower, every spell weaker. What should have been a balanced fight turned into a desperate brawl for survival. Healers shouted spells through tears as more fell. The stench of burned flesh and cracked stone filled the air. Shakti's spear was drenched in blood as she pushed the left flank back, roaring for her familia to hold. Finn kept barking orders. voice hoarse, eyes sharp, forcing what remained of the army into defensive wedges to minimize casualties. Haydine's magic flickered, his forehead slick with sweat. "I can't hold this much longer," he gasped, trying to stabilize mana flow against the sigil. "We just need to outlast their volley," Finn barked. "They're not volleying," Haydine rasped. "They're softening us up." Bell's arms burned like fire. His legs shook. Every impact against the oniric bloom felt like a hammer strike against his soul. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. The mist barrier thickened at his silent command, its shape bending and weaving like liquid moonlight. Even as the fortress cannons roared again, the barrier withstood it cracking, reforming, but not breaking. Adventurers near the center looked up at Bell, wide-eyed. Some were crying. Others clenched their weapons tighter. A healer whispered, "He's holding the entire line." Bell could hear their screams. He could hear the souls inside the Philosopher's Stones resonating from the fortress, whispering like a storm of agony. But he didn't falter. Not this time. The fortress began its third bombardment cycle, and the battlefield's sides were collapsing. The right flank was pushed back to the barrier's edge. The left flank barely held after losing a dozen soldiers to a chimera pincer. Blood ran through the stone grooves of floor 18 like rainwater after a storm. Otter roared, slamming a chimera into the ground and crushing its skull with a single punch. "If they break through," he bellowed, "we're done." Finn looked at the barrier, then at Bell, who was sweating bullets, pale, and standing like a pillar against the storm. "We hold the line here," Finn said, voice sharp as steel. "We make them choke on this floor." The adventurers responded with a battle cry not as loud as the first one, but fierce. But Amestris wasn't done. The bombardment shifted to wide dispersal shells, trying to wear Bell down through sheer volume. More explosions echoed across the cavern. Stone cracked. The barrier pulsed and screamed under the pressure. Bell's vision blurred. His hands went numb. He felt his body being pulled in two directions, his will and the magic intertwining painfully. But somewhere in that storm, a familiar presence pulsed in his chest. Nyx's voice echoed faintly in the back of his mind. "Do not falter, little star. The night endures the storm." Bell's breathing steadied, not fully, but enough to stop himself from collapsing. He dug his heels deeper into the stone. His magic flared again. The fortress shelling and chimera onslaught continued. But because of Bell's oniric bloom, the army had a shield, a chance to survive. Finn, Haydine, and Shukti continued rallying their forces, keeping formations from collapsing. Ace, Alan, Otter, Rollo, and dozens of hunters carved through flanking units in brutal, close-range battles. Healers worked on broken limbs, torn flesh, and burned faces in the middle of hell. Floor 18 had turned into a killing ground one Amestris had built to break Aurario's will. But it hadn't broken. Not yet. And at the center of it all, Bell Cranel stood unmoving, wrapped in lunar mist, holding back the storm with nothing but his soul. The roar of artillery drowned out everything. Floor 18 was a war zone. The Amestris fortress loomed in the distance like a jagged black scar on the cavern wall, its cannons thundering in relentless rhythm. Fire, lightning, and shockwave shells tore across the battlefield, detonating with brutal precision. Every explosion sent tremors through the earth and a cloud of dust and smoke into the air. The joint adventurer army of Aurario staggered under the assault. At the center of it all, Bell Cranel stood, his body locked in place, arms raised as if holding up the heavens. The oniric bloom barrier flared with lunar brilliance, liquid shadows and mist swirling together into a translucent dome. It was the only thing preventing the army from being completely obliterated. Each shell that struck the barrier rippled through it like a hammer blow, reverberating into Bell's bones. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, his breathing ragged and uneven. But still, the barrier held. Around him, the adventurers of multiple familias fought desperately. Their fauna was drained, strength stolen by the alchemical sigil woven into the floor. Healers were the first to falter. Their magic was too weak to keep up with the injured pouring in every minute. Triage tents were overrun, potions were running out. Screams of the wounded mixed with the whistle of artillery shells. On the left flank, a chimera commando ripped through a shield wall like it was paper, sending adventurers sprawling. The beast, a grotesque fusion of several monsters, plated in alchemical steel, roared with a sound that made the air vibrate. Its maw opened and a jet of fire incinerated 3 unfortunate soldiers before Tiona, and Tioni leapt forward in perfect sync, cutting across its neck in a flash of steel. Even then, it didn't die immediately. It kept fighting, dragging itself forward. The right flank wasn't any better. Iron-plated soldiers, hollow armors filled with philosopher's stone souls, advanced in disciplined formation, unaffected by fatigue or fear. Every blow they absorbed, they responded with brutal efficiency. Ace and Allen tore into their ranks, but even their legendary speed and skill felt sluggish. They don't stop, someone whispered hoarsely as another line buckled. Shakti Verma barked commands at her soldiers, her spears spinning in fluid arcs to push back 2 iron soldiers at once. Her voice, normally steady as iron, was rough from shouting. Behind the lines, archers and mages tried to support, but their arrows felt weaker, their spells fizzled before reaching their full power. The fauna-draining sigil blanketed the entire floor like a choking fog. Then came another artillery volley. The fortress fired 3 shells at once. 1 fire, 1 lightning, 1 shockwave. They hit Bell's barrier like falling meteors. Bell's knees slammed into the ground. A strangled cry escaped his throat as pain exploded across his ribs and shoulders. But still, the mist held. Hold the line. Gareth roared somewhere near the center, his war axe splintering the head of a chimera with a single blow. But even he was breathing heavily now. Hadine Sellen's magic circles flared beside Bell, thin lines of glowing runes meant to reinforce the barrier. But the drain from the sigil gnawed at him too. His face was pale, sweat pouring down his neck. Damn it, he growled through clenched teeth. Even my spells are being eaten alive. Shakti stumbled back to the command point, blood streaking her arm. This isn't working. We're not breaking through. They're just bleeding us out. Fin Dame stood at the forward line, cloak torn and boots covered in dirt and blood. His sharp eyes scanned the battlefield like a hawk. He didn't just see fighting. He saw patterns. The shelling wasn't random. The fortress wasn't attacking blindly. It was hurting them, pinning them exactly where Amestris wanted. Finn's mind calculated rapidly, cataloging everything. The cannon intervals, chimera positioning, soldier movements, the sigil's oppressive weight. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a kill box. They're not trying to fight us head-on, Finn muttered under his breath. They're trying to crush us. Finn, Shakti shouted, ducking as an explosion went off near the healer line. We can't keep this up. Hadine staggered closer, his voice raw. The sigil. It's too strong. We're not fighting just them. We're fighting the dungeon itself. Another artillery shell slammed into the barrier. Bell coughed blood, hands trembling violently, but his silver-red eyes blazed. He refused to let it fall. Behind him, adventurers huddled under its cover, wide-eyed and exhausted. Fall back, someone yelled. We'll get slaughtered if we retreat. Forward's worse, another cried. The entire line was on the brink of collapse. Adventurers were either swinging their blades on instinct or staring blankly in terror. Healers wept as their magic faltered. And yet, the fortress kept firing. Precise, merciless. Finn took a step forward, voice rising above the chaos like a blade cutting through smoke. That sigil is the heart of this trap. The cry snapped heads around. Even in the chaos, everyone heard him. It wasn't the fortress that was their biggest enemy. It was the floor itself, the sigil strangling their fauna, the invisible hand crushing them from within. Hadine nodded grimly. If that sigil goes, the fortress loses its advantage. Shakti tightened her grip on her spear. Then we take it out. Finn's sharp smile was nothing like joy. It was the cold edge of a commander finding the weak point in a nightmare. Exactly. Bell grit his teeth behind the barrier. His body screamed, but the night mist still pulsed and rippled against the shelling. If they could break the sigil, everything would change. The fortress roared again. The battlefield trembled. And for the first time since the bombardment began, Aurario's commanders had a target. Finn's orders cut through the chaos like a blade. Bell holds the center with Oniric Bloom, he said, voice raw but clear. Ace, Allen, Rollo, take the strike team. Hunters Cade, Mira, Jor, and 2 of Hadine's mages move to the nodes. Disrupt, destroy, don't get stuck. If you can break 3 nodes, the sigil will destabilize enough for Hadine to counter. Tiona and Tioni hold the left. Otter, hold the right. Everyone else keep the perimeter. If the strike team fails, we fall apart. Bell barely registered the words. His world was the barrier and the way the shells hit it. He gave a short, taut nod. The mist quivered like a held breath around him. He had no choice. He would be the anvil while others became the hammer. Hadine stepped forward then, dragging his staff and a tangle of crystal runes across his palm. He pointed to a rough sketch cut into a shard of stone by a runner. The sigil is a 5-node circuit, he said, voice shaking but precise. They anchored nodes into the cavern itself too along the northern ledges, one beneath the ribbed arch, another at the furnace station near the western alcove, and the primary anchor deep in the fortress fabric. Each node routes Philosopher's Stone output into the network. Destroy any 2 or 3 of them, and the resonance collapses into chaos. Break 3, and the system will most likely fail outright. Rollo crouched beside him and traced the marks with a gloved finger. His eyes, always quick, always searching, ran over the cavern's scars. Look for the seams where melt lines interrupt natural veining, he said. Where the stone has been hammered flat and scorched. Those seams hide anchor housings. Also, where chimera packs linger at rest. They guard the nodes. Amestris patterns always guard the power source. Finn's jaw tightened. Rollo, you mark them. Ace, Alan, you cover the arcs. I'll keep the dome stable. Hey Dean, keep the disruptors ready. Move now. Tiona and Tioni stepped forward before Finn could voice the next order. Both wore the same hard light in their eyes he had seen in battle before. We go, Tiona said. We'll reinforce the strike. Finn didn't look away from the map. He thought a beat too long and then gave a curt shake of his head. No, you hold the left. If you move, the flank collapses. The sisters' shoulders sagged only for a second. Duty decided them. They returned to their positions. Ace slid a gauntlet on without ceremony. Alan hefted his spear like a promise, and Rollo's grin was gone. Only a hard line remained. The 4 hunters, Cade's face still unshaven, Myra's eyes bright despite the dust, Jor's jaw set like rock, moved like a shadow train. 2 of Hayden's younger mages, lithe girls with sigil bands, carried small spheres humming faintly with countermagic. They had practiced this: plant the disruptors, detonate the anchors, and hope the stones inside the anchors couldn't be rebuilt in time. Bell, Ace said as she passed, blade singing faintly. Her hand brushed his forearm, an anchor in the storm. We'll make them regret cornering us. He let the words sink in. They sounded like a vow. He tried to answer, but the respirations of the world hummed too loudly. Instead, he lifted his chin toward the fortress. The strike team melted into the smoke like gray ghosts. They moved in small, practiced groups. Rollo ghosted up a scorched pillar and peered across a gorge where chimera bones still dotted the stone. His hands were quiet, fingers nimble. Mira and Cade slipped through a collapsed archway and found a tripod nest. Jor took a flank and kept his throwers ready. Ace and Alan positioned on the primary approach, Ace to cut and clear, Alan to force through iron barriers. The first node crouched at the mouth of the furnace alcove in Old Forge. The alchemists had turned into a power hub. Smoke still curled from its mouths. An iron-plated guard stood like a sentinel. A trio of slim suits patrolled the lip like jackals. Rollo signaled, and the hunters struck. Ace moved first, no shout, only the whisper of steel. She became wind, slicing through the tempered plates with a zigzag of motion that made steel cry. Alan's spear opened a corridor in the armor with a single, enormous thrust that split metal seams and pinned a slammer's suits shoulder. Cade dropped to a knee and swung a disruptor into a notch under the node housing. Hayden's sigils hummed in the sphere, thin lines of light searching for the anchor's frequency. The alchemists reacted. The tripod at the rim spat flame that carved lines across Alan's cloak. One slim suit dove, claws out, and Mira met it with a hunting dagger, the 2 of them a blur of violence that ended in a severed servo and a spraying of oil. Jor's thrower found a seam in the wall and shattered the small relay the alchemists had installed. Hayden's mages chanted in fast, violent bursts, shoving frequencies into the disruptor like a key in a lock. The sphere took it, registered, and spoke back. The node's shuttered armor rattled, a hardness in the stone cracked. Acer ruptures, one of the mages gasped. Now, Rollo hissed. They detonated the disruptor. The anchor shrieked like metal against glass, a sound that made the chimeras on the far ledges throw up their heads in confusion. The Philosopher's Stone core at the node flared red and cracked. A shockwave rolled out, and for a moment the world thinned, the cavern's pulse stuttering as the anchor hiccuped. But it did not die cleanly. The alchemists had prepared redundancy secondary clamps that fed a trickle to surrounding anchor points. Someone had expected this. A trio of slim suits surged out, and A's blade sang through the air. Alan's spear found one's throat. Cade took a blast in the shoulder, armor buckling. He went down hard. Blood feathered the stone. Move. Rollo, voice low and urgent. 3 left. They had taken 1 node. The strike was costly. Mira collapsed to her knees, pressing a rag to a friend's jaw. The mage's hands were trembling. Already the fortress reacted, tripods recalibrated, firing arcs shifted, more chimera thudded into motion. The field had learned them. They cut across ribs of the floor, faster now. Rollo's eyes kept scanning for seams, ancient hammer marks, soot stains, the faint shimmer of alchemical varnish. He found the second on a balcony where an iron sentinel had been welded into the battlement. The sentinel and a cadre of slim suits guarded it like priests. Alan swung the spear like a blade of weather, breaking the sentinel's knee armor. Ace vaulted the railing and moved like light. Rollo slipped into sever chalk lines as Hayden's mage implanted a disruptor. This node, when disturbed, twitched differently. The Philosopher's Stone inside screamed in a higher pitch, and for a heartbeat the whole cavern answered. Bells in the distant tunnels rang as if someone had struck a resonant gong. Chimeras answered with a baying lunge. The slim suits closed in like a net. Jor fell first, caught by a hidden pincer and taken clean through the chest. His howl was brief and pitiful. Even amid battle it burned through the strike team's nerves. Myra's hands shook as she tried to drag him behind a broken pillar, blood hot on her palms. Cade's breath came ragged through a shattered lip. His arm would never bend the same way again. Keep the pressure on the node, Alan growled, voice a shredded thing. He forced the spear into the gap and twisted. A seam opened with a metallic cry. Rollo's knife, quick as a thought, found the stone core. He had practiced for this tiny, surgical strikes that cracked the outer crust. The Philosopher's Stone inside flared and burned like a trapped heart. Hayden's disruptor took the echo and inverted it, the rune sphere swallowing the scream and spitting it back as a pulse that unmoored the stone's feet. Ace shoved Rollo clear and leapt back as the node ruptured. The balcony shuddered and a chunk of parapet collapsed into the gorge. A chimera crashed as stone fell on it, and for a breath the noises dimmed. They had broken 2 anchors. 3 remained. Back at the center, Bell felt the floor shiver in a way that was not the bombs. The sigil's hunger hiccuped and ached at the edges. Hayden sent a yell through the comnet. 2 down. Push now, Finn now if you can. Finn's command rippled through ranks. The army tightened and surged forward, as if pulling on a rope. The fortress's shells readjusted with a new nastiness, broader patterns that chewed away at the flanks, and the Chimera commandos redoubled their efforts to shield the remaining anchors. The cost had been high for the strike team. Jor lay still, his color gone. Cade and Mira were wounded. The young mages staggered, faces white with spent power. Rollo's knuckles bled where he had wrenched his fingers into stone. Ace returned first, blood streaked down one cheek, armor nicked, but eyes bright. She knelt at the edge of the barrier and looked at Bell in a single, dangerous smile. "We took 2, she said simply. "We'll take the rest. We will make them regret cornering us." Bell answered with a short, exhausted laugh that tasted of ash. Around them the field screamed. The fortress still fired, Chimera reared, and the remaining nodes pulsed like wounded beasts. But for the first time since the bombardment had begun, the sigil's grip softened at the edges and Hayden's crystal hummed with a lighter note. Still, the heart of the trap remained. 3 anchors, each better guarded than the last. The strike had carved a path, but it had not won the day. They had wrecked something vital, but the fortress had not yet been broken. Finn's voice came over the bustle, a hard thing made of calculation and grit. "We press. We break the others. We do not stop. Prepare for the next move." The strike team looked at one another, counting losses and breaths. Among them lay the weight of their choices, the dead, the wounded, the cost of a temporary advantage. The cavern returned the answer in a long, low rumble, the fortress's heart still beating, stubborn and cruel. They moved again, because there was no other choice. The cavern swallowed their footsteps as they moved deeper into the enemy's nest. Floor 18 was a labyrinth of war. The thunder of fortress shelling still echoed in the distance, but the strike team had long split from the main force, threading through fractured stone corridors where the sigil nodes pulsed like veins. The light was dim, but every pulse of red from the Philosopher's Stones embedded in the cavern made the air seem alive. Ace, Alan, and Rollo led the 3 groups, each aimed at a different node. The surviving hunters and Hayden's remaining mages followed, their faces pale but grimly resolved. There were fewer of them now. The earlier battle had taken many lives, and the drain of the fauna weighed on every breath. Rollo moved first, melting into the shadows like smoke. His group would strike the node beneath the east ledge, where the sigil's heartbeat pulsed strongest. The man's light frame and quiet steps were perfect for what came next. Alan and his team cut north, aiming for the upper platform where an iron-plated commander type had been spotted. His spear rested across his shoulder, blade gleaming faintly in the dark. Behind him trailed 2 hunters and 1 mage. Ace, sword drawn, went west. She was with 2 veteran hunters and the last of the talisman carriers. Her eyes burned despite the fauna drain. She could feel it. The enemy had fortified these places. Rollo crouched low beneath a series of broken pillars. Two chimera beasts prowled ahead, their bodies glimmering faintly with molten steel lines grafted into flesh. They moved like wolves but heavier, each breath like a furnace. Rollo motioned for his team to wait, his hand barely visible in the gloom. His dagger flashed once, a silent signal. A breath later, he vanished from their sight. He slid along the shadowed wall, slipping behind a cluster of debris. The Amestris engineers had installed detection wards, fine silver threads stretched like spider webs across the path. Rollo traced their edges with the tip of his blade. One wrong touch would sing to the fortress. But Rollo knew their design. He had studied these patterns for weeks. With steady breaths, he slid a talisman charm against the anchor rune and disrupted its flow. The ward blinked out like a dying ember. He looked up. The node was buried in the center of a ritual circle, surrounded by 5 iron-plated soldiers kneeling like statues, and an alchemist directing flows from a red glowing control box. The stone pulsed, alive and hateful. Rollo signaled once. His team surged forward. The silence shattered in an instant. Daggers found the throats of the closest chimera. The beasts let out gurgled roars, thrashing as hunters buried steel into their joints. Arrows whispered through the dark. 2 iron soldiers staggered but didn't fall, they simply turned, hollow eyes burning with red light. One of Rollo's hunters, a boy barely 17, got caught in the throat by an alchemical spike. He died without a sound. Rollo didn't stop. He sprinted through the chaos and slammed a disruptor sphere onto the anchor housing. The redstone hissed. Alchemical runes flared. The alchemist controlling the node shouted in Amestrian, but his cry was cut short as Rollo's blade carved a line across his ribs. "Hold it," Rollo growled. Behind him, the surviving mage began chanting. On the western flank, A's team hit resistance faster than expected. The tunnel opened into a wide, hollow chamber, its floor slick with blood and alchemical residue. Elite Chimera units patrolled here, larger, smarter, faster. They were forged from multiple monsters, plated in liquid steel that shifted like a second skin. Their eyes burned like coal. The first came for her with a roar that rattled the cavern. A's moved. Even with her fauna drained, she was a blur, a whisper of wind. Her sword flashed, carving through the chimera's throat, dodging its talons by inches. Another came from behind. She spun, caught it with a parry, and drove her blade through its core. Steel shrieked against steel. Blood and oil sprayed across the floor. But there were too many. She barked for her hunters to move. One vaulted forward with a spear and was promptly crushed between a chimera's claws. Another tried to flank, but was impaled through the stomach. The air was thick with roars, steel, and the dying. The mage behind Ace forced the disruptor into the node housing, even as another chimera lunged. Ace threw herself between them, intercepting the beast midair. The impact knocked the air from her lungs, but she didn't falter. Her blade carved upward, splitting the chimera's jaw. Her arm bled. Her knees shook. She didn't stop. On the northern platform, Alan faced something worse. A commander-type iron-plated soldier waited there, taller, broader, its alchemical plating etched with complex runes. It held a massive glaive, its eyes burning red like coals. Alan charged first. The clash was a thunderclap. Spear against glaive. Sparks erupted in a cascade. The ground cracked beneath their feet. Alan pushed, every muscle straining against the fauna drain. He struck fast, precise, turning each strike into a hammer blow. But the commander was strong. It moved with martial grace, meeting Alan's thrusts with fluid parries and vicious counters. One swing tore a gash into Alan's cloak. Another sent him stumbling back. "Keep moving," Alan barked at his hunters. One darted past to set the disruptor at the base of the node. The mage began his chant, but the commander pivoted fast, too fast, and impaled the hunter through the chest. The mage screamed, but Alan slammed his spear into the commander's leg, forcing it off balance. He twisted, dragged the spear upward, and shattered a joint with a loud crack. The commander retaliated with a blast of alchemical fire. Alan rolled, cloak aflame, skin seared. He came up swinging, driving his spear straight into its chest. The armor screamed like it was alive. He pulled the spear free, panting. Across the cavern, all 3 strike groups were under brutal pressure. Rollo's flank was collapsing. 2 hunters were dead. The iron soldiers closed in around the disruptor. He slashed through another alchemist, his blade red. "Get it working," he snarled at the mage. The disruptor hummed, too slow. A chimera lunged, knocking Rollo sideways. Ace's flank was worse. She stood on a floor slick with blood, chimera corpses piling around her. One of the mage's hands was broken. The disruptor kept slipping from her grasp as beasts surged endlessly. Ace fought like a storm fast, precise, unrelenting, but she was bleeding now. Deep gashes lined her ribs and arms. Alan roared as he finally drove his spear clean through the commander's chest, pinning it against the node housing. The iron soldier twitched, runes flickering. The mage detonated the disruptor, shattering the node. The ground shuddered as the third-to-last anchor cracked. But not without cost. 2 of his hunters lay dead. The mage coughed blood from magical backlash. Alan fell to one knee, gasping, burns across his left shoulder. The fortress responded to the node attacks. Chimera packs howled as more reinforcements surged from hidden tunnels. Iron soldiers swarmed like ants disturbed. The fortress cannons increased their tempo, the bombardment echoing through the cavern. Red sigil lines along the ceiling burned brighter, fighting back against the disruption. Bell, still at the center of the battlefield with oniric bloom, felt the pressure spike. The barrier shook under the renewed shelling. He could barely breathe. His knuckles bled from gripping too hard. But he didn't let go. He couldn't. He heard Finn's voice through the din, steady and unshakable. Strike team report. Rollo's breathless voice came first. Holding. East node under. Pressure. A's voice was sharp, short. West. Still fighting. Alan. North node down. Haydine's distant voice crackled over the communication relay. I can feel the resonance shifting. 1 node down, 2 under assault. You can do this. Hold. But the enemy wasn't passive. Alchemists emerged from hidden alcoves, launching alchemical fire and earth spikes toward A's and Rollo's teams. Chimera commanders joined the fray bigger, faster, armored with denser steel. Mages screamed as they were skewered mid-chant. Hunters were torn apart. Rollo was thrown back into the wall, blood filling his mouth. The mage near him was impaled by an iron soldier before finishing the disruptor activation. A's status. Finn barked. She didn't answer immediately. She was too busy cutting down a chimera twice her size, dodging flame and steel like a dancer amid death. Her breath burned. Her sword arm trembled. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. I've got it, she hissed. The disruptor sphere flared weakly, but before it could detonate, a massive chimera lunged at the mage behind her. They spun, but she wasn't fast enough. Her Falna was too drained. The mage died screaming, blood painting the stone. Ace bit down a snarl. She threw herself forward, sword blazing, and cleaved the chimera's neck in a spray of oil and gore. She kicked the disruptor forward, slammed her palm down on the rune, and let it flare. The node exploded, shattering alchemical runes across the cavern walls. Rollo's node was the last. He spat blood, forced himself to his feet. His remaining hunter was dead. The mage was dying. 3 iron soldiers surrounded the disruptor. Not today, he hissed. He flicked a smoke talisman into the air. Shadows bloomed like ink in water. He slid between the soldiers like a phantom, dagger biting through their joint seams. One fell. A chimera snapped at his arm. He shoved a blade into its jaw. He moved on instinct, bleeding from a dozen cuts. He slammed his palm on the disruptor. Go, he whispered. The device flared and the last anchor cracked like shattering glass. A wave pulsed through the entire cavern. The sigil's light dimmed, its hum faltering. Falna drain began to lift. Not gone, not completely but weakened. Rollo fell to one knee, laughing breathlessly through blood. At the center of the battlefield, Bell felt it. The weight crushing his body eased, if only a little. Oniric bloom flared brighter, pushing back the bombardment for the first time since the battle began. Finn's command snapped like thunder. Nodes down. Everyone, push forward. A roar rolled through the adventurer army as formations reformed and healers scrambled to aid the wounded. The fortress still loomed, the enemy still advancing, but the sigil was faltering. Amestris had anticipated infiltration, and the cost was brutal. Dozens lay dead, dozens more wounded, but the strike team did not break. The floor was slick with blood and ash. Chimera howled. Iron soldiers screamed their hollow cries. The fortress roared louder. But the adventurers were still standing. The battle was far from over. It was a war of attrition, now one they could finally fight on their own terms. The battlefield was shaking. The fortress cannons roared with renewed fury, their alchemical cores burning crimson hot. Artillery shells screamed through the cavern air, streaks of red and gold like falling stars of death. Each impact struck the edges of oniric bloom like a hammer to a glass dome. Mist rippled violently, cracked under the weight, and flared again as Bell Cranel clenched his hands together, knuckles white, muscles trembling. The barrier was holding, but just barely. Every second it lasted, it cost Bell pieces of himself. He stood in the middle of the chaos, blood dripping from his nose, his breathing ragged, his knees shaking from the weight of defending an entire army. Around him, adventurers shouted, and fought chimera screams mingled with iron soldiers' hollow roars and the distant, steady tum-tum-tum of a mistress' relentless shelling. The fauna drain made even the most hardened adventurers falter. The healers were exhausted, their magic thinned. The front lines were struggling to maintain their formations. And above them all, like a vulture circling a dying animal, the Amestris fortress continued to bombard them. Findame could see it clearly. The strike team was pushing at the nodes, but the bombardment was becoming too much. Bell's barrier was beginning to flicker. Once it fell, they'd be torn apart. He shouted orders, crisp and sharp, rallying the front line with sheer force of will. Shields up. Don't let the front crack. We hold until Bell can't. But Bell heard him, and Bell refused to let that moment come. Another shell struck the barrier dead center. It rang like a bell through his bones. His vision blurred. His body folded down to one knee with a dull thud. The mist wavered, as if the night sky itself was about to collapse. The crowd of adventurers nearest the barrier flinched in terror. A crack like lightning snaked across the surface of the bloom. And then everything else disappeared. The screams, the explosions, the sound of battle all fell away. Bell stood alone in the quiet, in the place between waking and dreaming. His mindscape. He was floating on the ocean of liquid shadows, waves lapping against invisible shores. The night sky above stretched endlessly an expanse of swirling galaxies, bright stars, and cosmic rivers. The moonlight shimmered faintly against the dark tide. Nyx sat beside him, or rather Nyx's presence enfolded him. Draped in her shifting black kimono patterned with constellations, hair silver lavender tied in its intricate bun, she was as vast as the sky itself. The stars in her eyes looked at him not with pity, but with something deeper. Expectation. His breath came in ragged bursts. I can't hold it anymore. Nyx reached out, one cool hand brushing against his face. Her touch was gentle, but it felt like eternity pressing against mortal skin. Do not falter, little star, she whispered. Her voice was like the night wind, soft but unshakable. The night endures the storm. He stared at the waves beneath his feet, chest heaving. They're all counting on me. If I break, then break the storm instead. He looked up. Her hair fluttered in an unseen wind. The constellations on her kimono began to glow softly, as if the night itself was bending closer to him. You are not the wall. You are the night, and the night swallows the fire. Bell closed his eyes. For a heartbeat, he let himself fall deeper into the shadows. And the shadows answered. Back on the battlefield, the barrier suddenly flared. The crimson shell streaking toward the army should have struck the dome and shattered it, but instead, the mist caught it. Long, smoky tendrils like living night lashed out from the surface of oniric bloom. They wrapped around the incoming shell, coiling like serpents around prey. And then, they deflected it. The shell veered away, exploding harmlessly against a cavern wall. A heartbeat of stunned silence rippled through the adventurers closest to Bell. Then another shell came and another tendril lashed out, intercepting it midair, redirecting it away. And then another. The artillery fire that had rained down like divine wrath was now meeting a living barrier, not just holding, but fighting back. Bell rose slowly to his feet. His cloak of mist whipped around him like a storm. The ground beneath him darkened as liquid shadows pooled outward, spreading across the earth in swirling patterns like tidal currents. The stars above his mindscape bled through into reality. Tiny sparks of cosmic light flared inside the mist, like 1,000 constellations flickering in the dark. Behind him, a spectral figure of Nyx unfurled across the battlefield, massive, ethereal, like a goddess drawn in starlight and shadow. Her presence wasn't physical, but everyone could feel it. And then the halo appeared. Above Bell's head burned a crown of shifting stars and lightning, like a ring forged from the fire of a newborn galaxy. It burned bright not with heat, but with a cold, terrible brilliance. His eyes opened, glowing like twin galaxies, filled with swirling light and infinite dark. The oniric bloom expanded. The barrier grew outward, doubling in size. Tendrils of mist danced through the air like celestial ribbons, intercepting every incoming shell with impossible precision. Each one was turned aside, some flung back into the walls, some dissipated harmlessly in the air. A wave of lunar mist surged outward from Bell, rippling through the battlefield. It spread like a tide across the cavern floor, seeping into every corner, interfering with the fortress's Philosopher's Stone artillery. The cannons began to stutter. The red glow inside their barrels flickered, faltered, and dimmed. One after another, the shelling slowed, and then stopped. For the first time since the battle began, silence, a strange, fragile silence, hung over floor 18. Findame's head snapped up. His eyes widened not in fear, but in cold, sharp realization. He wasn't the only one. Shakti lowered her spear slowly, lips parted. Even hardened veterans like Gareth Landrock and Otter froze for a heartbeat, staring at the figure at the center of the field. Bell Cranel was no longer just a boy with a barrier. He was standing in the middle of the battlefield, enveloped in cosmic night, halo burning like lightning and flame, shadow mist coiling around him like the breath of the stars. Behind him, Nyx's spectral form loomed like a silent guardian, vast, regal, terrifyingly beautiful. The moonlight in the cavern dimmed in comparison. No one spoke. For a brief heartbeat, the war paused, not because anyone ordered it, but because every soul present couldn't look away. A's sword lowered an inch. Tiona and Tioni stopped mid-step, mouths slightly open. Even Otter's stoic face cracked, his eyes narrowing in something dangerously close to astonishment. "What is that?" a young adventurer whispered, voice trembling. "Bell," Finn breathed. But Bell didn't hear them. His entire focus was locked on the fortress. The mist responded to his will like it was alive. His pulse was its pulse, his breath its breath. "Forward!" Finn suddenly roared, snapping the army out of their stunned silence. "Now, while they're off balance." His voice cracked through the moment like a whip. And the adventurer army moved. The front line surged forward like a wave. Loki Familia and Ganesha Familia charged at the same time, shields raised. The Falna drain was still there, but it was weaker, sluggish, like the sigil's grip on the battlefield was loosening under Bell's overwhelming surge. Healers rushed to drag the wounded back behind the expanded barrier. Tiona and Tioni sprinted alongside Gareth, carving through chimeras that were now momentarily disoriented. Iron soldiers faltered as the mist ate away at their targeting precision. Finn barked rapid commands, his strategic mind already turning this miracle into momentum. "Hayden, shift the mages to reinforce the left flank." Shakti, press the spear line, pin their forward patrols. Gareth, Otter, cut the chimera groups down before they regroup. Roger. Move it. Go. The battlefield transformed. Where before there had been chaos, a desperate holding action beneath relentless shelling, now the adventurers pushed forward. The absence of artillery was like a dam breaking, morale surged. Screams of pain were now joined by shouts of battle cries. Chimeras fell under coordinated strikes. Iron soldiers were pulled into tight melee engagements where numbers mattered less. The fortress cannons, still faltering from the Nyx surge interference, couldn't provide their relentless support. And at the heart of it all, Bell. The pressure didn't vanish for him. If anything, it was worse. The power of the surge tore through his body like lightning in his veins. The halo burned hotter, and the mist howled with wild force. His lungs felt like they were being crushed, his muscles screaming, his heartbeat thundering in his ears like a war drum. But he held it. The mist grew thicker, darker, but also steadier each breath, a war against collapse. Behind him, Nyx's spectral figure bent low, her hands hovering above him as if steadying the flow of her power. "Steady, little star," her voice echoed faintly in his mind. "The night bends for no one. Let it flow through you." Bell gasped through clenched teeth. I'm fine." He wasn't. But he would be. His gaze sharpened, locking onto the fortress. The bombardment crews inside the fortress were scrambling. The philosopher's stones inside the artillery batteries were reacting erratically to the Nyx surge, throwing off their alignment. Several cannons sparked, their magical cores destabilizing. "Commander," one alchemist screamed. "The shells won't stabilize. Reroute the NO, not that." "Sir," the mystic sits interfering with the resonance. "Fire manually then." But they couldn't. Every time the cannon charged, the lunar mist tendrils coiled through the air and cut the flow. It wasn't destruction. It was domination. For the first time, Amestris was off balance. On the flanks, Tiona and Tioni cut down a wave of iron soldiers, their blades gleaming despite the drain. Tiona laughed breathlessly between swings. "Hey Tioni, are we actually winning this?" "Shut up and swing faster," Tioni grunted, smashing her blade through an armored chest. Gareth led a hammer charge that broke a cluster of chimera like a stone through glass. Shakti's spear line skewered 3 beasts in a single coordinated push. Even Hayden's mages, pale and exhausted, gritted their teeth and used the brief reprieve to lay down layers of reinforcement magic on the vanguard. Finn's eyes flicked back to Bell one last time and he made the call. "Push forward," he roared. "For Orario." The army's roar shook the cavern. Bell's vision blurred at the edges. The world was a kaleidoscope of smoke, steel, and stars. He could barely stand anymore. His boots sank into the pool of shifting shadows beneath him. He was enveloped in it, Naunix's power coursing through his veins like a tidal wave threatening to swallow him whole. But where others might have been consumed, Bell endured. The halo burned like a small sun above his head. His eyes, like galaxies, stared forward unblinking. The mist danced around him, intercepting and nullifying the last sporadic shells that tried to break through. Every impact that once shook the army now simply melted into the night. All across the battlefield, the adventurers saw it. Some stopped fighting for a heartbeat just to look. The boy who had once stumbled through the city of Oreo, who'd once ignored again and again, now stood like an avatar of the night sky, a living constellation, a wall and sword all in one. A healer whispered a prayer. A Ganesha soldier slammed his spear on the ground in salute. Tiona grinned through bloody teeth. Ace smiled faintly. Just once. The fortress faltered. The army roared. And for a moment, just a single, shining moment, the battlefield belonged to Oreo. The storm had not passed, but the night had risen to meet it. Bell Cranel stood at its center, halo burning, galaxies in his eyes, shadows at his feet. And the world shook in awe. Thank you for listening. I truly appreciate your time and support. If you enjoyed this audiobook, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated on future content. Your support means the world to me and helps keep this channel going strong. Until next time, take care, stay awesome,